Okay, so I rounded out the edges of my piece with my 3/8 roundover bit, and you can see the side where I was cutting with the grain came out pretty smooth, but the side where I was cutting against the grain is a bit ragged looking, even though I was making those climb cuts. So I'm gonna smooth everything out with sandpaper. Sandpaper seems pretty straightforward, but it's surprisingly easy to introduce a lot of inaccuracy in your piece by using it incorrectly. So you never want to just have a sheet that you're kind of free-handing, because then it's just going to kind of dig into all the divots and bumps or softer areas of the wood. So you always want to give yourself as much structure as possible. So I have a couple kinds of sandpaper. I have the 3M sandpaper, 120 grit, and it just has kind of a waxy residue on the grit that keeps the sandpaper from getting clogged too quickly. And then I also have Norton 120 grit sandpaper that has a adhesive back on it. So I'm gonna use a sanding block for the areas that are flat. So this is just a piece of MDF with a bit of cork. The cork just gives it a bit more leniency. As I'm going over the surface, it becomes less clogged less quickly. And I can stick that on to my sticky back sandpaper. You can't be too frugal with sandpaper. It dies pretty quickly, and if you keep sanding with dead sandpaper, you're going to really slow down the progress on your project. So as soon as I notice that it's not really cutting very efficiently, I'm going to refresh my sandpaper on this block. And I'm always going to be trying to sand with the grain of the wood. Any sanding outside of the grain is going to kind of immediately become evident as soon as I put a finish on there. And then I'll also be wearing my dust mask because I don't want to get any wood dust in my lungs. And one thing I'm trying to stay mindful of is that because I've hollowed all my end grain here, if I sand too aggressively right by the shoulder of my tenon, I can actually dig into the hollowed end grain and create a gap along my shoulder. So I'm trying to only sand very, very lightly right here, because I probably have like less than a 64th material that's just flat there. So any areas that are not flat, again, I don't want to just go in with a single sheet of sandpaper freehand. So one thing I use a lot, especially for bent lamination pieces, is I like to create a little sandpaper book. So I fold my sheet of sandpaper into quarters. I tear one side down halfway, and then I just fold it up like this. That way I have sandpaper on both sides exposed. And then once I've used both of these sides here, all I have to do is fold it up in the opposite direction, and then I could use the two opposing sides. And that just gives the sandpaper enough stiffness that it's not necessarily going to dip into those low points. It's still going to skim off the high points first. Sanding is probably the least glamorous part of woodworking, but it is important to leave plenty of time to sand towards the end of your project.
On average, I think I spend at least as many hours sanding a project as I do making a project. It is critical to remove all of the machine marks, traces of glue, and bumps and scratches from the making process before applying any finish. Finish will only draw attention to any overlooked areas.
So I've done pretty much all of my shaping work. I might want to do a little bit of fine tuning, just blending this edge here into my shoulder. But I've done everything I could with 120 grit sandpaper. The next step would be to move to 150 or 180 grit, but I'm going to save that for after the glue up because I find I tend to always damage the piece just a little bit during glue up, so I never bring anything to finish level sanding. And the most informative type of light is actually not going to be this kind of overhead lighting. It's going to be a low raking light, so I can hit these lights, turn them off, and just shine a flashlight parallel with this surface here to see what kind of like scratches or bumps or inconsistencies show up.